those dialogues. There will also be an opportunity for you to raise questions to the experts in the Q&A session of the moderated session, which is in the later part of the event. So with no further ado, please allow me to introduce Dr. Sudhir Sharma, who is the Asia Regional Coordinator of the NDC Action Project, who will be delivering his opening remarks. So over to you, Sudhir.
Thank you so much, Shannon. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to our distinguished speakers, participants, and colleagues to this first session of the 4-part virtual event series, as Shannon mentioned, under our global project called the NDC Action Project. I'm very happy to see this session kicked off as an important element of our NDC Action Project. Just wanted to give you a bit of a background as to why we are doing this and what is the context. We have this NDC Action Project, which has been kindly and generously funded by the German government with the objective of supporting 10 countries to build their capacities in rolling out the NDC implementation. Where this capacity building is not in terms of just training workshops and providing them with tools, but actually the project would work with partners within the country in identifying 2 actions in the NDC, which have been detailed out by the countries, and then taking them forward in terms of detailing out as to what specific actions would be needed and by which actors to engage in implementing those actions. In Asia, the 3 country partners are Bangladesh, Mongolia, and Vietnam. There are 7 other country partners across the globe. Now, as I mentioned, it is quite interesting if we look at a lot of analysis of NDCs in the countries. For a number of countries, it is quite interesting to see that assessment says that if the current policies are implemented over the NDC period, the emission reductions achieved would be more than what countries have subscribed in their NDC submitted to UNFCCC. And I would say that's partially to the fact that this is the first time most of the developing countries have taken up a specific target and are in the process of implementing that. So there is a sense of caution in their NDCs based on, I assume, the concern that they would not like to be not achieving their intended goals at an international scale. So in that context, this project becomes important. Especially, I'm sure we just concluded COP26, a lot of good outcomes, though I'm sure a lot of us also think it could have been much more than what was achieved. But one of the things which came out before we started with COP26 was UNFCCC's report, and the report indicated that even with the new updated NDCs which have been submitted, we would be well short of the reductions that need to be achieved by 2030. And these to be able to be in the hunt for keeping the temperature increase below 1.5 degrees. So that is a scenario. If we add to it the net zero goals which countries have presented, and keep in mind that these are goals, countries still need to work out and then integrate it back into their NDCs, then possibly that would help further kind of getting closer to the 1.5 degree target, but it still leaves a significant gap. So in that context, the whole NDC Action Project is to create that confidence within the country and the communities within the country, not just the government, but the private sector actors, the academia, the civil society organization, through actually practically demonstrating how these actions could be implemented and what needs to be done. So that's the objective, and we basically would like to see this project, through this project, that translates into ambition so that going forward, when the next NDC comes up in 2025, it can add a higher ambition and we can quickly close the gap as we move forward. As I mentioned, I mean, we are working closely with national institutions, so most of the work would be carried out by national institutions. UNEP and UNEP's collaborating center would be working with these national institutions in providing technical backstopping and advice. But the actual work would be carried out by the institutions within the country. And that's the part of the effort to create that sustainability of learning within the country. Now, in that context, also one of the things that we realized while working in these countries is that there are a lot of things common across a number of countries in Asia Pacific in terms of the priorities on adaptation and mitigation that they're carrying out. So one element of this NDC action project is also to then share the experience which comes out of our partner countries with other countries in the region, because this is not the only initiative. There are a number of initiatives, and I am sure if not all, most of the countries are covered by one or the other initiative. So it would also be an opportunity to kind of bring and learn from those experiences. So this event is one part of that initiative to start sharing. We are not yet at stage where we are sharing the results, but we identified one of the areas which Bangladesh would be working on, but it is also equally relevant in context of Asia Pacific. Asia Pacific is one of the most vulnerable regions in the world, and a large part of the population is in coastal areas, which will get affected by the climate change. And one of the key areas there is the built infrastructure in the coastal areas, and especially the economic weaker section, which in any case in current development has challenges accessing affordable housing, would have even greater challenges. So that's where the government of Bangladesh asked us to focus on to see how that issue can be addressed and what solutions could be found which are affordable, at the same time would withstand any impact that is likely to happen in the future. I'm sure our experts who have been working in this field will give you a much better picture of the vulnerability of this region, and that would be also included in the setting up. So I would not get into that in repeating it, but just emphasize the fact that this we identified as one of the most common issues and challenges that most of the countries face in this part of the region. So as that was the reason why we thought we'll kick off with this particular issue. Now, there are many challenges in this in terms of, what exactly do we mean by climate resilient housing? And this interpretation could be different by different actors. So how do we come towards a common understanding of what it is and then look at what solutions exist? We also wanted to understand, what is affordability, because that varies across, and how can it actually, what are the different actions which could be taken to make things affordable? As I mentioned, special focus of what the Bangladesh government wants us to focus on the economically weaker sections, because they are the most vulnerable among even the Asia Pacific countries. The third element we wanted to bring together was to identify what knowledge and technical capacities exist across the globe in various institutions. They might not exist in one country. There might be a number of organizations doing work in different spaces. So how can that be brought together and how can that be shared, both to make aware that where this work is going on and also to provide that information. And lastly, two important things is what the governments need to do to be able to replicate that, because a lot of these efforts happen at a demonstration scale. Governments need to take action on their end, and this being on the economically weaker section, governments definitely have a big role to play in terms of facilitating the scale up. and how can different financial resources be scaled up, could be leveraged to bring in to scale up this implementation. So that was the broader thinking that we had in terms of organizing and bringing different experts together, as well as the policymakers in Asia Pacific, so that we could enable a dialogue between them in terms of the presentation of what work is going on, what knowledge already exists, what different approaches and tools could be used, but also provide an opportunity to policymakers to, ask their questions or doubts or issues that they think they need to understand to be able to translate this into action within their own specific country. So that's is the primary objective, and with that objective, actually, I'd be requesting our participants today to feel free and ask as many questions as possible. We've brought together with the kind acceptance of all these experts who have done a lot of work in their field. So please let us make use of their time here with us today. And also, I know COVID is a challenge, but in a way, it also provides an opportunity. Getting all of us together in one physical location in normal times would have been really challenging. So we have actually quite a few experts coming from really far parts of the world compared to where we are sitting in Bangkok. So please do take advantage of that, of having these experts with us. And also, we would like to actually take on behalf of UNEP and UNEP partnership in Copenhagen, as well as the NDC partnership, to thank the NDC partnership and our financial support provider, which is the government of Germany through ICI, on their behalf to welcome you all to the event and to look forward to a very fruitful discussion. And looking forward to actually hearing and increasing my own knowledge, as well as the issues and concerns of our developing country partners. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Sudhir. So let's now officially kick off the event. Our first speaker and also the only presenter of today's event is Ms. Alicia Rogodon. She works at the Sustainable Housing Solution Division of UN Habitat. She's an experienced architect and urban planner, and she has experience in architecture design, urban design, and in sustainable building development. She's trained in Madrid, in Sao Paulo, in Sydney, and in Beijing, and has carried out extensive research in innovation and new spatial strategies for sustainable future of the buildings. So Alicia is going to give us a theme-setting presentation on the impacts of climate change on the housing sector and what is required to improve the housing resilience in order for people and the livelihoods to be protected in light of the future climate events. So Alicia, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Shannon, and thank you for the invitation to be part of this event, which we think is crucial as well, not only for the concerns of the region, but as well because as part of the land, housing and shelter section in UN Habitat, we believe and we demonstrate that housing is a pillar to sustainability, not only because of its adequacy and mainly affordability as well, but as a driver to sustainable development. I am not sure if you're able to see my screen right now.
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, because there's going to be just a short introduction. I will just jump into what drives us here. So I'll go through the general challenges, then we'll talk a bit of the international agenda and what's UN Habitat's mandate. And afterwards to define, as we were saying, what is for UN Habitat adequacy and sustainability in housing. And at the end, just finish with some short examples of resiliency and adequacy in houses, most of them post-disaster or in vulnerable areas, which are global examples. Some of them are in Asia, but not all of them. And this will be just a short debrief for setting the scene for the experts to discuss further in these topics afterwards. So what is housing and what are housing challenges nowadays? So to meet the housing needs in countries in the latest years has been one of the greatest challenges for governments in the 21st century. Not only because housing is transversal, so everybody owns a house, but because up of the day of today, up to 1 out of 4 people still lives in a slum or an informal settlement, which means that over 230 million are new slum dwellers added to the global population since 1990. And this, regarding climate change, could be increased if measures are not taken into account very quickly, as it was said in the latest COP and in the latest events as well. So what for us, talking about this global community and the emergency in urbanization and development, set up the challenges of the housing sector and some of the biggest challenges in our current times, which are not only informal settlements, but also rapid urban-rural migration. And I would add here as well migration from climate vulnerable areas, which is going to be increased in the next years. And this comes together with an unaffordable housing stock that is growing across countries as well, related to urban poverty, social exclusion, and as well other terms like pollution, and as I was saying, vulnerability to climate change and disaster, which we know Asia is one of the areas that is more prone to this, specifically in flooding as well. So this absence of adequate and affordable housing options and this lack of financing as well and other resources make us think that we have to come up with new solutions and new projects that integrate both all of the stakeholders in the countries coming from the government, public and private sectors, research institutions, and as well NGOs and civil society to overcome this challenge. And this is the current scene. But if we look ahead in what's going to happen in the next 20 or 30 years, our housing stock is meant to grow. So it's said that UN Habitat has data and says that only 50% of the current building stock has been already built. And this lacking 50% will grow most probably in rapidly growing in the development countries focused in Asia and Africa, which means that out of this 50% of building stock, on average, 55 to 70 is devoted to housing. So if we tackle housing as one of the key pillars of change as well, we would be able to tackle most of the problems in the cities as well and in the building development areas. And as we were saying, and is the setting up scene of this this small workshop or this one-day workshop, Southeast Asia is being defined as the most vulnerable area to climate change coastal issues, which means that this problem will grow and it would affect transversally as well several countries in the region. Saying that a 2-meter area rise could displace over 180 million people, mostly living in Asia. And as the doctor was saying previously, in Bangladesh, around 18 million people living in coastal areas and could lose their homes if there's a 1-meter increase of the sea level. And it said that sea level could increase up to 2 meters, so that would raise this number even higher. And apart from that, it's not only about coastal and the level of the sea, but as well, we all know climate change also brings other hazards, such as floods and storms that could make migrate over 42,000 people a year in Asia region or lose their lives because of these disasters, and this will grow even higher, making evictions, migrations, losing the houses, and lack of financial security to promote sustainable construction and to promote per case of housing solutions, a growing problem in the future years. So with that, we come to what is the international agenda and what is UN Habitat's role and UN Habitat's mandate regarding this issue. As we all know, the Sustainable Development Goals have been set up as a global framework to understand and as an agreement to understand the attention to urban issues and to the development as a problem, and how to tackle the different programs and measure them transversally. So we are seen here, we are mostly related to SDG 11, Sustainable Cities and Communities, and with Goal 11, the aim to make cities inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. And among the different targets of SDG 11.1 directly identifies housing as a pillar or as a goal and objective, and to ensure access to adequate, safe, and affordable housing, and basic services and slum upgrading. So we're tackling here the whole concern on affordability in housing. But housing is not only this target, it also is related transversally to other goals, such as we like to highlight here SDG 12, meaning responsible consumption and production, on how these houses are being built, what is the material that is being used, where does it come from, and how does, for example, extraction affect the landscape and all of the countries themselves, and as well directly climate changes with SDG 13. And as well, as we were saying, transversally, Goal 1, 3, 6, 7, and even 17, when we are talking about building partnerships, will be directly affected, and that's what we are aiming to give response to with solutions and with our work. And added to that, the new urban agenda as well talks about leaving nobody behind, to ending poverty in all of the dimensions. So to provide equal access to affordable houses and adequate houses is one of the main goals as well. So if we skip to what does UN Habitat housing section or land housing and shelters section do to target these goals, we have mainly three key principles. The first one, to build houses for people, so leaving nobody behind. And this means not the informal sector, not the urban poor, or not any of the different countries behind as well. The second one is using housing as a vector for prosperous societies and economies. So as we were saying, housing is a driving sector, and it builds up to 70% of the building and construction portfolio. So it's both a bulk number of what is being built, but as well, it's the main driver and a tool for changing how we build and for fostering sustainability. And the third one is building houses for building sustainable cities as well. So as a part of the whole construction grid. And in this, our section works in different pillars. And the first one is how to promote inclusive housing. Second one, adequate and affordable housing. And the third one, that's more related to this, the current workshop that we're dealing with today, is green and resilient housing. And in this three pillars, we work transversally, helping government, helping the civil society, and helping different stakeholders to strengthen the technical cooperation, strengthen as well the normative work, and work for advocacy and outreach. And I'm sure some of the members and experts here have worked with their section, as I know before as well. So how do we, let me check my time. So I'm running quite short. So just to define adequate housing, we're talking about three main ideas, or three main pillars, that are basically tenure security, promoting basic services, ensuring affordability, ensuring as well habitability, accessibility, location, which is one of the most important ones here, and cultural adequacy. So I'm going to skip very quickly through this, but for example, one of the questions of the doctor before was, how do we ensure affordable housing for all? So from UN Habitat, we claim that when a household spends less than 25 to 30% of the monthly income on rent and housing-related expenses is affordable. And as well, when the ratio of average house price is not more than 3 times the annual household income, as well, we can say that we are ensuring affordability. And by the same way, if this is not being this is not the case, then housing is not affordable. Doesn't matter the income level of the family that we're talking about or that we are developing the houses for. And common causes underline housing affordability. Well, as we know, supply does not meet the demand. Finance mechanisms are not in place. High cost of basic construction materials. We have seen a rise in construction materials the last year, and that has also increased the price. And a land factor, which is closely related to the problem as well as policy environment. I will just skip to this, but as well, I just wanted to highlight that housing as well and residential sector makes up to 22% of energy consumption directly linked to residential. If we talk about the whole building construction sector, will come up to 36%. And it also brings a high part of the emissions as well. So we are tackling most of the emissions and the energy consumption of the sector, but as well, the technology to lower this has already been in place and invented. So it's the sector that can move the fastest as well towards decarbonizing in the next years. And just coming to some examples. So I brought this together just to set up the scene for the following discussion groups. When we're talking about resilient and adequate and sustainable housing, we are tackling 5 main pillars. The first one, which is normative products, and that they're a must in order to ensure the sustainability in housing. And the 4 other ones, I took them as well in relation to the setting up the scene for this event. So resilience and affordability, land resilience, meaning the choice of the land and ensuring sustainable and resilient land for construction, innovative and successful financial modalities, and material selection and architecture design. So when we talk about normative products, UN Habitat has been for the last 10-20 years developing several products that are directly related to constructions and to housing, and how to ensure design, materials, and risk mitigation and climate are tackled in our construction. So we have from the green building, going green, or even a building sustainability assessment and benchmarking. And as well, we have several tools like Sherpa and other ones that we are currently updating as well to tackle these issues. When we're talking about land resilience, an example, for example, is Pakistan, how they develop with the Akka community, and as well how they won this world award is well with this risk mapping tool. So including the community and developing innovative tools that include mapping, and as well using new technologies such as satellite image and scientific knowledge, and as well as community knowledge to tackle the land that is prone for housing, and tackling the land as well to identify risk in the future years that can be a warning towards how this land is going to perform, or if it's going to be affected by hazards and by climate change, and how we should map these areas, and how also construction and housing should adapt the way and should adapt the materials, the techniques, and how it's going to be built depending on how prone the area is to climate change and to climate hazards. When we talk about resiliency and affordability, I brought here an example from Chile, how they developed this resilient social housing after they had an earthquake, and they identified the area as a flood-prone area, and how they tackled all the different stakeholders, including government, communities, NGOs, to develop new housing solutions that were ready to face to rebuild the area, and as well to face new climate hazards. So the importance of identifying the stakeholders and building together towards tackling the problem. A third question relating to raw material selection and architectural design and community inclusion is this eco-brick technology that was raised in Nepal, and it says from 2019, but it has been going, from 2019 to 2020. 21, and it was developed after the two intense earthquakes that occurred in the region, followed by the stream floods. So there was a vast amount of household left that lost their houses, so that it needed to be reconstructed very quickly and transversally across the country. So this solution on bringing CSB, compressed stabilized blocks, to the communities by financing the machinery, so the mechanism of building the blocks, was transversally financed across the country, and more than 200 micro-enterprises were created by purchasing together the construction techniques, and also by bringing together the community to building these houses. These new houses that were stronger and that were more prepared as well to face earthquakes and new flooding solutions were built actually in 1 to 2 days, even with the technique, and as well were inclusive in the building methods, and as well into gender inclusion into construction. So women were also introduced not only in the construction sector, but as well in the enterprise and in the entrepreneurial grid of the country. And over 2,200 jobs were created at the moment. And last one, because it's a bit less related, when we talk about innovative and successful financing modalities, there's this program has been ongoing for 14 years already in Mexico, and it promotes green mortgages and green financial systems to include new technologies that lower energy consumption, and well, not only energy consumption, but that improve the housing solution in 30 different categories that are all of them related to climate change and sustainability across the sector. So how to promote and how to link these financial solutions to tackle as well sustainability in housing. So just to finish, I've gone very quickly through this introduction. I hope it also opens minds and brings other examples from other places to the sector. And the final key messages that we would like to transmit is to invest in an energy and resources efficient and climate resilient housing sector. Pays back, and it actually comes with more sustainable settlements. The impact of housing bilaterally, so how the housing sector impacts environment and how environment impacts the housing sector, so they're closely related. And the importance of mitigating climate change and disaster risk reduction strategies, and how can we all collaborate to this and contribute to mitigate climate change. And last but not least, what we come from the housing, land, housing and shelter section, always to place people at the center. So when we think, when we act, when we build, and when we are strengthening the sector, because this helps us make the solutions, the policies and the programs stronger, and as well to leave no one behind. So housing needs are for everybody. Everybody owns a house, from the most poor to the richest countries. So how to include all of this? And just with that, we would like to finish. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to reach us, Jesus or me, online, and just leave the floor for the discussions.
Thank you very much, Alicia, for providing us the background and the context for the next round of moderated dialogue. So allow me to introduce our moderator of the next part of the event, Mr. Kirk Garrigan, who is the Chief of the Sustainable Urban Development Section of UN Economic and Social Commission of Asia Pacific, UNESCAP. Before joining UNESCAP, Kurt served as Cities and Buildings Program Manager for UNEP and was instrumental in creating the Global Alliance for Buildings and Construction, which many of you are aware of. He has also served for more than 20 years in many operational and managerial roles for the Metropolitan Government of Nashville, Tennessee of United States, including as a deputy mayor. So Kurt, over to you.
Shannon, thank you very much, and apologies, some workers decided to do some very loud construction right outside my window, just as we were starting the session. So apologies for the disturbance. It's a pleasure to be here with you all and to serve in this role as moderator for this session. Obviously, you've heard the overview from Alicia, a very comprehensive introduction to the issues of affordability in housing and some of actually introducing some of the solutions. You heard from Sudhir the challenge of climate change and building resilience. Now we'd like to hear from some of the country representatives. What are the specific challenges that you have and what questions you may have for some of our experts? So I'm going to turn first, let's go to Bangladesh. And if I could introduce Mr. Anwar Hossain, who's the superintending engineer for the local government engineering department in Bangladesh. Mr. Hossain, you have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Kurt, for giving me this opportunity. Actually, you know, Bangladesh.
You need to speak a little louder. We can't hear you.
Yes, everybody is known to share with Bangladesh that Bangladesh is a low-lying flat plain with high population density situated in a delta. So Bangladesh faces a lot of challenges every year, like actually cyclone, flash floods, and storm surges, and also temperature extremes. And this actually leading to loss of damage, loss of life damage, loss of infrastructure damage, and adversely impacting on actually livelihood. Reason behind that, especially for the coastal communities, their livelihood possibilities mostly depend on two climate sensitive sectors, especially one fisheries and other agriculture. So and actually following the catastrophic topics of catastrophic disaster of 1991, Bangladesh actually prepared to construct cyclone shelter project, and World Bank estimated that 5,500 cyclone shelter will be built as a actually disaster management plan of Bangladesh. As of now, near about 3,800 cyclone shelter completed, and only cover 5 million people for the coastal region, but over 18 million people living in the coastal region. Remaining people are still actually vulnerable to the climate disaster. So this climate disaster yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we
Yes,
can hear
please
you.
proceed. Yes.
Yes, actually, this climate disaster uproots millions of lives. So, in this context, what would be the future housing in the for the coastal communities? So, the question that affordable, resilient housing for the coastal communities is one of the vital actually project that can actually build the community resilient along with cyclone shelter. Yes, actually community resilient, affordable resilient community housing is not an easy task. It is very difficult. It is very difficult and challenging because first of all, actually the minimum space, or future density of the development, minimum space requirement for individual dwellings is one of the challenging issues, because especially in low income people, they actually wants to live in a very congested place, and that does not follow any formal standard. So minimum space standard is very essential for actually maintained for maintained and easy access, and it is very essential. So the current regulation or law do not have any regulation or law that specify minimum standard of housing. This is very challenging for future development, housing development. And the other is challenging issues that what flooding and logging is very vital for the coastal communities, and because the community actually build their house below the road level, so they faces lot of flooding problem, and actually this is very unusual. So this is a very big problem. And another is salinity effect, because we are using the material content in the coastal region, engineering material, that is construction material, bricks, and actual sand, even water is contained salt. So this makes efflorescence, it makes actually salinity to the structure. That is one of the vital issues. And the another issues that actually in the coastal region, most of the communities actually build their houses proximity to the canal, along the canal side, without any slope protection, without any remaining any distance. So I think to reduce the casualty during disaster, we should have specifically delineate the actual set distance from the river, from the canal. They can actually build their house, and slope protection with standard slope protection. So and another big issues that to me, most of the houses in the coastal areas built by the owner either by non-professional person or by engaging some contractor. They are following some common method. So I think just the challenge is actually owner wants to reduce their actually construction cost. So in these consequences, resilient housing with affordable is very vital. But resilient housing, if we build resilient housing, that will actually resilient their community through protecting their protecting their lives, protecting their property, and protecting their livelihood. So I think, yes.
Could I ask you to wrap up, and
yes.
if you have a question for our expert?
Yes. Yes.
If I could ask you to wrap up your remarks and pose a question to our expert.
Yes. Yes. Because affordable, resilient housing for the coastal communities, main actually challenges are actually minimum space standard that need to be specified. And in current situation, there is no actually minimum standard for housing. So that one question, and another question that is how could we actually composite two things, affordable and actually resilient. Affordable relates to actually economic condition, and resilient relates to system stability. So this is very challenging issues. If we can actually minimize the cost by providing natural solution along with engineering solution. For example, in coastal areas, we can save the house by providing actually windbreaker or shelter belt, providing by trees sufficient away from the house that can actually divert the wind and reduce the wind speed. So if we actually adopt climate change adaptation, engineering structure along with natural based solution, then can be a good result for the coastal community.
Thank you, Mr. Hussain. Do you have any specific question for our expert?
Yes, you can, for Bangladesh, you are going to resilient housing. What type of resilient housing you are going to approach, even for coastal region?
Okay, thank you very much. Let me turn to our first expert, someone who I've had the pleasure of introducing many times in the past. It's good to see you, Dr. Rajat Gupta, who is the director of the Oxford Institute for Sustainable Development. Rajat is an expert in energy efficient housing and buildings, and I've had the pleasure of working with him many times in the past. And it's,
Good. See. All right. Thank you.
Again, a pleasure to introduce Dr. Rajat Gupta. May I ask all others to please mute your microphone? Thank you.
Thank you, Kurt. Great to be introduced by you and nice to see you again. And thank you, Mr. Hussain, for laying out some of the issues, especially for low-lying, densely populated coastal areas such as Bangladesh. And I'll try and respond to some of the points that you've raised because they are, I think, really important for many countries as we see a changing climate. We know that low-lying, densely populated coastal areas, especially at risk of storm surges and flooding, coupled with sea level rise. We've also heard that housing, often accounts for the major share of the monetary losses relating to disasters such as coastal flooding. And these will obviously include damage to property, building envelope, damage to life, obviously, this financial hardship, and disruption to life, water contamination, as we heard. We've also heard that climate resilient housing is one of the most effective measures to not just save lives and mitigate the loss of property. And this has been confirmed actually by the NDC submitted by about 191 parties that identified human habitat as a key area for adaptation. So whichever angle we look at, climate resilient housing is a fundamental solution. But what do we really mean by it? I think that especially for coastal regions, and that's what I'm going to try and unpack. So building climate resilience in housing in coastal regions is really about integrating good design and construction techniques to adapt to strong storms and flooding. One of the ways obviously is to raise houses above the flood level, whether you elevate them using pillars or stilts, and you can either permanently raise the building, or in some cases design the building so it can float upon water, and I'll illustrate that a little bit further. Even when these options are unavailable, it's important to consider the type of materials that are used. And also how the house is laid out in terms of spatial configuration. I think Alicia had elegantly mentioned that living spaces, could be situated on the top floor, so that even in case of flooding, you can actually operate that living space. And also beyond the building itself, there are options for improving the local area through nature-based solutions such as sustainable drainage systems, stabilizing river banks, or using paving materials that allow rainwater to pass through. And all of that will reduce the amount of water runoff from an event. And we shouldn't forget the relevance of early warning systems and evacuation plans, because that can of course ensure greater safety for residents. There's also been a question raised about affordability, that we can do all this, but is this affordable? I think one evidence that we saw very recently is in the World Bank organized global competition, which was about designing modular houses to withstand various climatic conditions under $10,000. And quite a few innovative ideas arrived from all over the world, which I think is a great reassurance that resilient design can also be low cost. And I think that is one point I really want to drive before I go into some real world examples. It is that if we are approaching this through good design, it is not going to cost more usually. That should be low cost. And to give some examples of these in the real world, And they're also illustrated in our report, which UNEP produced on, which is the practical guide to climate resilient buildings and communities. I'm going to start first with an example in India. These are flood resistant homes in Kerala, which probably face similar situations to what you find in Bangladesh. And essentially, these are elevated, with stilts. They're constructed, the pillars have been constructed with treated bamboo, mud, and concrete. Plastering has been done with, mud tiles, coconut shells, and treated bamboo. So everything that's available locally. And in case of a flood, the inhabitants can await evacuation on the third story. So they're able to go up the floors and stay safe. Similarly, in Malaysia, one solution to coastal flooding has been water buildings, which are estimated to be elevated at 2.5 meters from the ground to allow water to flow and the wetland vegetation to grow underneath. And the passage that you have connects each house to the village pathway as a transition space between public and private domains. So it's about
Rajat, excuse me, are you sharing your screen? We don't see any.
No, I'm not. I'm just.
Okay, please proceed then.
Yeah. So the point I'm saying is that each house, the transitional space that happen because of those elevated spaces can also become part of good urban design. And there are multiple benefits of doing this. Then in Nigeria, adaptation measures have included planting trees for soil stabilization, renovating the flood-resistant materials, elevating buildings, and installing, permeable paving and floodgates. In Bangladesh itself, I've come across a concept design for a community building to provide shelter during cyclones. And this is a very interesting prototype, I think, because it's saying it's capable of raising up in case of floods. So there are buoyant tanks under the building, which can lift up if the flood waters rise. And this approach is also seen in something what we call amphibious homes, which under normal circumstances would rest on a concrete foundation, but start floating when the water level rises during a flood. So, there are some innovative solutions around now. And in India, there was a study done of these elevated buildings using a cost-benefit analysis, because we're looking at affordability here. Whether the initial investment for these structural columns, for raising either permanent or semi-permanent construction was worth it. And the study found, interestingly, that when compared to standard construction, the benefits of an elevated building far exceeded the costs of construction. So I think that's a good point to kind of keep in mind. But obviously, implementing these at large scale will require policy interventions, will require capacity building, will require some access to finance as well. But all these examples, when I was going through, there were some themes that came out, and these are some key messages to remember as we build climate resilience in housing. That if we want to have successful solutions, they will need to be green, they will need to be local, and definitely people-centric. Otherwise, we can have unintended consequences. And by green, I mean, these resilient measures need to be nature-based, on passive design principles. Some of them have been mentioned before, whether it's natural ventilation, orientation, bio-based materials, utilizing green and blue infrastructures, because all nature-based solutions are bound to have other benefits apart from flood management or, heat vulnerability. They're also going to help us improve biodiversity and will be good for our health and well-being. And by local solutions, I mean, these design and construction methods have to be locally rooted, not just in terms of physical context, but also by considering local labor conditions, the local ecosystem, whether we have local supply chains, to promote a circular economy. And this may need proper training and skills development. This may need awareness raising and knowledge gain of how to apply these systems. But it's important to maintain those local supply chains and enhance them, because then you can have more systemic and long-term solutions. Last but not the least, I think these solutions need to be people-centric, because as was said before, and I'm going to drive it further, is that resilient people is equal to resilient housing. And we very well know about the dynamic interaction that occurs between people, their climate, and buildings. And I think that's really important to remember, that how resilience needs to be built into those aspects. So we need to have enough care and attention. We need to pay this attention to the needs of inhabitants of all ages, gender, financial means, so that solutions are affordable and equitable. Because as we have been hearing, no one should be left behind in this kind of transformation. The other point I want to drive is that climate resilience in housing is not a snapshot. It has to be considered over time. It's a longitudinal process. It has to be done prior to any event, during the event, and also long time after the event. And then finally, I would say that, as we start to deploy these solutions in the real world, if we want to scale up and replicate them rapidly, because we have very limited time, we must ensure that we are monitoring and evaluating these solutions that have been deployed and are sharing their learnings widely on what works, for whom, and under what circumstances, because that is really what will drive the scale up and replicability faster. And failures are as important as success here. And such an empirical evidence base will hopefully positively influence decision making and also policy delivery, I think. I hope I've answered some of your questions, Mr. Hussain, but happy to pick up more. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much, Rajat. And it was good to hear your intervention, especially the point that you made late on monitoring and evaluation. And hopefully we'll have the opportunity to come back in this session more specifically on how to do that. Let's move now to our next country representative, Mr. Paul Chris Hoesi, who's the Deputy Director of the Ministry of Infrastructure Development in the Solomon Islands. Mr. Hoesi, please share with us your challenge and a question that you may have for an expert. And if I could ask you to be brief and within your 5-minute allotment. Thank you so much. Over to you. I believe you're still muted.
Can you hear me?
Yes, please proceed. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. By the way, first of all, I would like to say thank you and fortunate to be taking part of this event, sharing some of the remarks and challenges that encounter small islands today in the Pacific, especially in Solomon Islands. What I have here is basic examples and experiences from Solomon Islands. The first point I have here is the scarcity and depletion of native selected for local bush materials to build proper house become a big challenge. This leads to houses partly built or just built with other type of materials which cannot last long. For example, in parts of Kudelkana province, a traditional thatch building can last for 15 to 20 years if these are properly built. As population increases, high demand of shelters and natural stock of native bush materials have been exhausted. The second point is a loss of traditional know-how and skills for traditional built thatch houses is critically gave rise to non-resilience to natural disasters. Architecturally, traditional thatch buildings are replica to the modern type buildings at which all building elements and pieces are meant weathertight and weatherproof. For instance, a thatch building do have eaves, ridges, and allow different ties and nodes. Basic orientation is high paramount, which can withstand during strong winds. And also geographical location, positioning of buildings, raised buildings close to sea or river basin is important. These are traditional know-how which have been kept passed down from generation. Today, it is obvious that these traditional skills are slowly and gradually forgotten by younger generation. And the shift to modern build approach also pushes away traditional knowledge of building shelters. The other point is the growth of unregulated squatters settlements in urban centers and no regulated building ordinance. Example, for us in Solomon Islands, our national building code is still in a draft form. It was sad to say that, but like most of our homes found in informal settlements around in urban centers, especially in Honiara, are semi-permanent or temporary shelters. These buildings also situated in wastelands where always prone to flooding or landslide. For instance, in 2016 in Hornera flash flood, settlement around the Mataniko River were all washed away and more lives were lost. It is a tragic natural disaster which can associate with no control or no proper building regulations or ordinance to govern growth of informal settlement. As such, these settlements are more prone to natural disaster, and also such urban drift provide inadequate planning and are not resilient whatsoever in terms of natural occurring. The National Building Code, which I have mentioned earlier, is still in draft form for over 20 years and yet to be gazetted. This ordinance can provide avenues to strengthen provincial building ordinance and zoning, particularly where to build and the type of materials to be used. The absence of non-regulation and strengthened building ordinance are not fully addressed, which this problem can be associated. Other than that, as other speakers have said, the high cost of construction materials for durability and affordability is lacking. The other challenge, which is obvious in Solomon Islands, is the negligence and mass destruction of natural vegetation. For example, logging activities and even loss of vegetation and reserves along coastal areas, for example, mangroves, and along the riverbanks, gave way for coastal inundation and continual instruction of seawater. For instance, destroying mangroves or trees along coastal areas allows for a continual coastal inundation. Lastly, the natural causes is observable here in Solomon Islands. Natural disasters are occurring more frequently and increasingly severe. In some cases in Solomon Island, while in some phenomena, preservation of cultural norms and practices kept people not pushing for relocation or leaving their originated place of living. For instance, most people living along coastline in Solomon Islands hardly move away onto other places, though seawater high marks is just a few meters away. They kept staying until destruction worsened, knowing these natural causes will sooner over. This hinders and pursuit for building resilience and climate adaptation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hoyasi. I'd like to turn now to Dr. Mitul Vahanvati, who's the co-lead of the Climate Change Transformations Research Group and Sustainability and Urban Planning at RMIT University in Melbourne. Her research focuses on the long-term impacts of housing reconstruction projects, theory and practice of socio-ecological systems resilience, and community-led approaches. Dr. Vahanvati, would you react to Mr. Hoyasi's intervention, and what specific guidance or advice would you have?
Thank you for the question. I've been working with Solomon Island or in Solomon Island since 2019, and Hoyasi has been to one of our recent workshops as well. So I'm glad you are able to be present here. There are. I'll start with one example, say at settlement scale. Solomon Island, like most small island developing states in South Pacific, are highly vulnerable. Recently, the World Risk Report, published in 2021, this year, identified Solomon Island to be world's second most at risk country in the world, so following Vanuatu. So as Mr. Hoyasi pointed, there are many hazards facing the people living there. 1/3 of population lives in informal settlements. So as part of one of my action research, which involved funded by UNFCCC and administered by UN Habitat, that has been going on since 2018, that has 15 different components. But I'm involved in nature-based solutions at settlement scale for those living in urban informal settlements. This project is led by Dr. Darren McAvoy. And what we've done there is we have conducted a LiDAR and GIS-based risk assessment of Honiara, the capital city of Solomon Island, based on the local ministry's already existing data, and identified which settlements are most vulnerable to multiple hazard types. Now, based on this, we identified 5 informal settlements which were at high risk. So they are hotspot settlements, and we conducted a co-design workshop with local youths in Honiara, as well as at RMIT University. Myself with 2 other colleagues, we have been running design workshops with students to come up with nature-based solutions for these settlements. So 2 out of the 5 settlements are coastal, one also at the river mouth and has sea level rise, as well as the gushes of river Matanico when there is heavy rains. So students came up with designs which included windbreaks, mangroves, soil stabilization, embankment design along the whole river corridor, protection of ecosystem corridor, a water retention basin, as well as water retention, and ways of slowing down the flow of water from steep hills. Because believe it or not, there are steep hills more than 45-degree angle at some places. They're really steep. A vetiver planting system to absorb a lot of water and remain inundated for a long time. And these designs have been factoring in a number of things, not just soil stabilization, ability to live in saline water, ability to provide food, its attraction of insects, providing medicinal plants. So addressing multiple challenges by one solution. So, and apart from that nature-based solutions, I've been working on developing a shelter guide for Solomon Island. And the local team has been doing workshops with all these informal settlements, identifying what are the key issues for preparedness of shelter before a cyclone or flood event. What are the early warning systems? What is the response? What is the recovery process? And what is the governance setup? And this guide is to be published before the end of this year, and it will be readily available at the start of next year. It will be endorsed by the International Red Cross and the Ministry of Infrastructure and Development, which Mr. Hoisi represents here. They are the lead authority in charge of response, recovery, as well as preparedness when it comes to shelter. So this guide has proposed 2 different set of ideas: wet proofing or dry proofing of house, as in either allow the water to go under the house or create a barrier but create water to go around the house by creating water channels. No real one design has been proposed because locals are highly skilled. Sorry.
Colleagues, could you kindly mute yourself when you don't speak? Thank you.
Because locals are highly capable of construction skills. There is enormous potential in terms of skills there. The only thing that is missing is a lack of materials, quality materials. There's a lot of cheap materials flowing in their market there from China and other parts of the world. local bush timber as well as sago palm leaves from which they used to make thatched roof is depleting. So people are not making really thick roofs, but they're making really thin woven roofs, or they're using corrugated metal sheets which are not very sturdy, like cheap ones, and they corrode after a while. And they're not using cyclone-safe straps or bolts. So in heavy cyclone winds, these roofs are flying, and they are like metal flying in the air, like metal blades, which can rip apart people. So that is really scary. So despite there being enormous talent and skills there, people are really craving for a set of standards, and what is it exactly that they need to follow to ensure their house is multi-hazard safe. While some know exactly, they have tapped into traditional knowledge, they know how to design house to streamline with wind, how to orient the roof. Some people also make their columns strengthened by putting corals, dead corals around it, and actually the lime becomes stronger with more water and inundation. But that knowledge, because youth are migrating to new places, that knowledge doesn't hold true. They have to be used to a new environment. And hence the local government has been capturing these local stories and have been trying to incorporate that with scientific knowledge and produce videos and stories as in terms of books. But it's an ongoing process that hasn't yet been completed. So I'll end there, but the main lessons learned from these two are there is a real need for capacity building at all levels. Like the local ministry and government does want some support with bringing all different organizations together, updating the planning scheme, the building code, and I think the shelter guide will assist in some way. And there's capacity building needs at community scale who want to actually know, how can I assess my house right now and how can I strengthen it with little material resources that I have. So that is the need and right now, and that is the focus from next year. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bahandati, for that response. And thank you, Mr. Hoyes, again, from the Solomon Islands, sharing your challenge and experience. In the first two presentations, we really heard about, how to strike the balance between housing affordability and resilience. And we heard some about architectural design and construction and the selection of materials, more looking at solutions. We'd like to shift the conversation now really to the policies that allow countries to scale up, and also how to focus on financing to make housing more resilient and affordable to the wider community. We'll start with remarks from Ms. Lu Lin Hong, senior official from the Ministry of Construction in Vietnam. Ms. Huang, the floor is yours.
Yeah. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes,
okay.
Yeah.
Yes, we can.
Yeah. Good afternoon. Good morning and also good afternoon. Yeah. First of all, I would like to thank organizer to give me a chance to share with you some situation and challenges to promote climate resilience housing construction in Vietnam. As you know, Vietnam is one of the countries most affected by climate change and sea level rise, with 3,260 kilometers of coastal line from north to south, and over 50% of the population lives in 28 coastal provinces and cities. And there are about 40 coastal cities According to the climate change scenario in 2020, Vietnam's coastal cities in the new period must face great challenges due to the effects of climate change, sea level rise, and natural disasters. Vietnam coastal urban areas also face other problems, such as the possibilities of destruction of technical infrastructure system, decrease in water supply for daily life, houses, and construction. Within 100 years, sea level could rise from 27 centimeter to 66 centimeter, or from 49 centimeter to 1 meter, according to the Vietnamese scenarios. Aware of that, Vietnam has issued policies to support poor households to build houses to avoid storms and floods in the central region, according to Decree number 48 by 2014 and document number 481 by 2018 by issued by the Prime Minister to implement housing support for poor households in the central region. The programs is implemented from 2014 to 2021. By this program, 13 provinces and cities participated and supported more than 19 million poor households built and repaired. According to recent surveys by Ministry of Construction in 28 coastal provinces and cities in Vietnam, the need to build safe houses is very large, around 110,000 houses, of which around 2,500 houses are located in coastal districts of the provinces. Areas need immediate construction or renovation support to protect people's lives and properties. This so that Vietnam needs much resources to build climate resilient housing for people. From 2020 to now, the Ministry of Construction has chaired the resilience housing component under the Green Climate Fund, GCF and UNDP, which name improving the resilience of vulnerable to climate change related impacts in Vietnam. The goals of the component is support about 4,000 houses to resist storm and floods. The project is implemented from 2017 to 2020. The year is extended 1 year. The component is implemented in 5 provinces. That is that are Thanh Hóa, Quảng Bình, Thừa Thiên Huế, Quảng Nam, and Quảng Ngãi. The component supports more than 3,800 households at the expenses of $1,700 US per household, in which the total construction cost is expected to be around $3,000 US per apartment. In addition to support preferential loans for households, there is additional capital contributed by household along with the support of relatives, the communities and organizations, mass organizations, individuals, etc., through the forms of financial support, building materials or workers. Sorry. In fact, it has been proven that storm and flood-proof houses that can adapt to climate change at a reasonable cost have the main structure equipment to that of a permanent house be under the GCF UNDP projects. The effect is great, not only helping the owners ensure the safety of life and properties, that's also minimizing damage, but also helping a number of surrounding households sell safe shelters in the areas. On the days of storms and floods, helping many households escape poverty and contributing to the socio-economic development of localities, reducing state budget expenditures to overcome the consequences of storms and floods, thereby effectively using natural resources, foster development, creating positive effects, strongly affecting the process of socio-economic development of localities. I know the representatives from UNDP has attended these events. By the way, I would like to thank UNDP has support Vietnam in general and also MOC in particular to implement the project. Ministry of Construction has researched and issued a number of housing designs for climate change and disaster response region with reasonable prices, using local materials and at low cost. Therefore, in the coming time, it is necessary to replicate models of safe house that's resistant to storm and flood in Vietnam, especially for the poor and near poor in coastal areas. Many localities have also supported more funds from the local budgets and mobilized more communities, participants, and other legal sources of capitals to further support households to build houses against storm and floods. In addition, households have also provided additional funds or mobilized additional support by monies, building materials, workers, etc. The support of housing to prevent and avoid storm, floods, and disaster is policies to take care of people's life has practical and humanistic meanings, needs to be determined by all levels of party committees and local authorities to implement synchronously and effectively and support and contribution of the community. Now I give you some. There are some difficulties and obstacles during implementation of program and UNDP, GCF UNDP project. The first thing.
Ms. Huang,
yeah.
May I ask you to please come to a conclusion?
Okay. Now I just say quickly. The first thing is a system of supporting document and policies of the state is still lacking. The second thing is limited human resources and expertise. And the third thing is limited financial resources. And the other thing is the weather and in some province and the construction of housing depends on the custom of the people. Okay, if I have more time, I will speak more details about the obstacle of this. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And now to respond, we have with us a friend of mine, Dr. Donovan Story, who's the head of global policy and influence for Real, which is a global organization developing innovative solutions for affordable housing. Dr. Story has had previous positions both with the Global Green Growth Institute and here at UN SCAP, and is actually the predecessor, my predecessor, as the chief of Sustainable Urban Development section. So very well-rounded and experienced expert to respond to you. Donovan, over to you, please.
Thanks, Kurt, and I'll be nice and brief because I think that Ms. Huang has really captured a lot of the innovations in Vietnam, and I wanted to first acknowledge what's been done in Vietnam, and I think that the policy initiatives which were just outlined are a very good example of something to track, actually. And Ms. Huang sort of pointed out, you know, this recent project on improving resilience of vulnerable coastal communities to climate change, which has been supported by Ministry of Construction, the Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Development, but also UNDP and the Green Climate Fund. And I think it's a great example of working through with communities the combination of resilient houses, of the restoration of mangroves and nature-based systems, of also focusing on education and awareness of communities and also local government authorities on climate change and climate change risk and natural disasters. And I know that the Ministry of Construction has the ambition of, you know, scaling this up to some 100,000 resilient houses in future. So I think this is a great example of a combination of awareness, education, of focusing on resilience, of supporting local capacity, including communities themselves, but also focusing on the construction elements and the building elements with a focus on pro-poor outcomes. So it's a very important project, I think, to look at. The key, of course, is scale, and we know that 70% or so of Vietnam's population lived in coastal areas and very vulnerable low-lying deltas. And we need to move beyond projects to more holistic solutions, which are, you know, which can encompass many more people. And here, the role of policy and regulation, which is the focus of this part of this of today's event, is really, really critical. Policy and regulation has a major role to play in taking projects and putting them at the level that's required in terms of scale, and doing so also through looking at the regulatory frameworks and how to adjust those to manage the future risks and vulnerabilities to climate change and natural disasters. And we know that the urban poor and the rural poor, but particularly urban poor, have a great exposure to the risks of climate change, and that there's a need to understand that vulnerability in its many different forms. And it is a multi-dimensional form of vulnerability, has been pointed out by Paul also in the Solomon Islands, which I thought really encapsulated it as well. And we need to look at the role of policy and going beyond projects, as I've said. We know the risks. I think that we're aware that the assets of the poor are few. Their assets are very vulnerable, including the important asset of housing, which we know is a locus of resilience, but is also a great form of vulnerability. And we know that the poor are very much less protected. They don't have the resources and the assets to fall back on when homes are destroyed through natural disasters or livelihoods are affected by climate change and natural disasters. So we know that their basket of livelihood responses is much more limited than people who are less poor. We also know that then the poor have less capacity to deal with shocks, and their house is a key primary asset for them. So instead of seeing the house as a form of vulnerability, let's reframe it as an opportunity for strengthening the resilience of the poor. And let's look at what should be done around housing to strengthen that resilience. So I've identified three things, which Kurt, I'll just briefly touch upon. The first one is a structural issue. And that is that we know that land and housing markets are not very pro-poor in Asia and the Pacific. That we know that the poor can only afford often to build housing in riskier areas of vulnerability. And that's true whether we're talking about Ho Chi Minh City or whether we're talking about Honiara, that the poor are pushed into vulnerable ecosystems, and in so doing, they're building housing in very poorly planned environments. And that is also undermining overall urban resilience. If the poor are forced to cut down mangroves to build houses, then all urban people are threatened by that destruction of nature-based systems. So we all have a stake in making sure that the poor and vulnerable groups of society have access to decent land and decent housing. Otherwise, it undermines everybody's resilience. And we know that this is somewhat of a negative spiral which we need to break down. And we also need to understand, therefore, housing solutions in their broader environment, their ecosystems, and link in housing solutions with nature-based solutions, so we understand the importance of strengthening the whole ecosystem, of which housing is an important part. So the third is structural, and really encouraging governments and local governments to look at land and housing markets and to assess them, to test them against the challenges which climate change will bring through the century. Are they fit for purpose, those land and housing markets and policies? Are they fit for purpose in terms of future scenarios of climate change, sea level rise, and natural disasters? The second is technical. And that there is and this was raised in the context of Bangladesh as well, and that there's a relatively poor understanding of the role of the house and houses in resilience. And there's a lack of expertise, or there's a lack of sharing of the expertise which is there, and how to strengthen housing for future climate change scenarios. And how to strengthen housing at the level of affordability is, I think, one of our greatest challenges. We need to move beyond this trade-off of affordable solutions and resilient solutions, and we need to find a better intersection of them both. And we know that there's a reluctance for the acceptance of alternative building materials, both at the level of policy and regulation and of community. So I think here the role of policy and regulation is really to redouble efforts to invest in the research that's required on alternative building materials, to work with communities on acceptance, work with communities on building their ability to design effective housing solutions, to be able to work with materials, and to be able to do this in both the formal and the informal sector. And I think that what is also important here is that governments and local government, including with local government, need to be more open with their data on forecasting climate change threats and forms of vulnerability. They need to share that data on risk, and they need to support the research on strategies, including building materials and housing design, to be able to manage that risk. Too often, I think that people are expected to plan and to invest in their housing in an absence of information. And the third and final one is financial. You know, we know that public resources are limited. They tend to be reactive to disasters. They're not always adequate in helping people rebuild from disasters. We need a more proactive form of investment and financial support. We also know that community resources are limited, and in the absence of secure tenure, that the poor are reluctant to invest over housing, and they're reluctant to invest the time that's required on strengthening their housing. So we understand that these are the challenges. So I think that policy and regulation has a really critical role to play in terms of supporting investment, greater private sector investment as well in green infrastructure, in the encouragement of new expertise and technologies and design solutions. I think that there is a broader set of preconditions to help communities in the private sector and also local government invest in more secure and resilient housing, and that includes issues of security of tenure. It includes issues of getting communities on board on those solutions as well, and also investing in non-housing infrastructure as well in terms of nature-based solutions, which we've heard of. I think that government policy and regulation has a really key role to de-risk everybody investing in resilient futures. And at the moment, I see too many barriers around people wanting to invest in what needs to be invested in simply because there's a lack of understanding of the threat, but also there's a lack of security that that investment will be worthwhile, it will be protected, and that it will be supported by a government policy and framework of urban planning and regional planning, which will mean that that investment is not wasted. So those are the three areas that I'd really like to highlight. The technical areas and the technical sharing and learning, the de-risking of finance and the investment that's required from all parties, and also the structural issues, which I think government has a key role to play in addressing to ensure a more resilient future for all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Donovan. I mean, you brought it all together very, very effectively in those three areas. You touched on the social, the economic, and the environmental issues related to providing housing. You talked about policy and regulation, finance and investment, and then really brought it very well, tied it all together with the technical support, de-risking, and structural issues. So thank you very much. We're going to move now, if we could, to two regional experts who are going to share with us their experiences on innovative and successful financing modalities that have really demonstrated some positive results for households, in particular in the informal market. We'll start first, if we could, with Ms. Sheila Patel, who's the founder and director of the Society for the Promotion of Area Resource Centers, or SPARC, in India, which she founded in 1984 to support community organizations of the urban poor. Dr. Patel, the floor is yours, please.
Thanks.
I could ask you to stay within about 6 or 7 minutes, please.
Okay, I'm not a doctor, I'm just a grassroots activist. So, first of all, I think Donovan's reflections are very helpful to me because it actually looks at the complete dysfunctionality of cities and informality that exist today. And no amount of twisting and turning and innovation is going to address that, because this is a deeply political process. The right to live where, with what amenities and services, and how these are going to be financed. So I wear different hats. I'm the head of SPARC, which works with a large network of grassroots social movements in about 65, 70 cities in India. I'm the past chair of Shack Dwellers International, which, by the way, developed the concept of cliff, which came before Real. So we have a connection there. And at present, I am one of the 6 ambassadors for the Race to Resilience, looking at the issues of cities, informality, and resilience. And so what I want to start off, if I may, because I have very short time, is to say that 93% of global habitat for very vulnerable communities is designed, constructed, and financed by themselves. What the governments do, what subsidies they provide, what investments they make, hardly touches 5 to 7%. And this is the first important thing to do in terms of total volumes. So we all have to acknowledge that all our interventions are really, really very, very modest and small in relationship to the ocean of challenges that the habitat and the informal livelihoods, which are based mainly in informal settlement space. And so in our work, what we have tried to do is to look at ways by which we can make the subsidies that are available to communities leverage to buy grants that are often needed to kickstart these projects, not only with the view of making this money available to the communities that need it, but that through that process, they produce new construction materials, they produce artisans who worked in large construction businesses to make small businesses that they can service their own neighborhoods and poor communities, and to push the norms and standards of municipality to allow the kind of design and construction that is needed. And the example I want to quickly give you is that 90% in South Asia of housing in large cities is less than 25 square meters, which in India is the minimum amount of space you require to access a subsidy. So we've been able to tweak it in a way to say, let's do ground plus one structure that will give you 225 square meters and access the subsidies. So the idea is to do all these things within this process so that the poor develop new notions of materials, construction, design. The second thing that we do is we tell government that the most important contribution you can do is to provide amenities and services. All these informal settlements don't even have 10% of the required amenities and services in terms of volume of water, number of toilets, drainage, sewage lines, electricity, health centers, as a result of which these things which are statutory for cities to do are not getting included in this process. And therefore, we always say that leave the houses to the poor, build the infrastructure. And we have been involved in getting municipalities in different states and nationally to make at least provide minimum sanitation and water to all. And now it's become a national program. Again, taking organizations of the poor to bid for these municipal projects, design alternative mechanisms and do it. But the most important contribution that we make is in pushing forward the right of poor people to access new technology, new building materials within the finances that they have to build houses incrementally. Because given the volumes that we have, this is not going to happen through government delivery of services. And therefore, a lot of work in that area is to study how people take the money that they have, the materials that they have and work. How do we stop the municipality from demolishing these houses? And then now in the area of climate change, to see how roofs, walls, and floors become climate resistant to floods, fire, flooding, and winds. And of course, the whole idea is to do that. And so we have started a campaign called A Roof Over Our Head as part of the race to resilience in COP26. And the whole idea is to get very, very localized solutions that address this with the local universities involved, the local technology, the municipality, and the communities, with us using the resources we have to do demonstrations of what is possible. And we believe that all this thing comes in the area of adaptation to local change. And this is a very seriously local activity. If it is not owned, managed, and driven by local actors, it will not get scaled up, because cookie cutter approaches of what works in one area being taken to the other is not what works in the area of habitat. The local traditional processes, materials available, money available, all these factors and the cities changing regulations make a difference. So the important thing is not to look at finance from a top-down perspective, but to look at how financing emerges from what people can do, cities can do, private sector can do in the form of new affordable materials, and what scientists say works in different climatic conditions. So I'll stop there. And I hope that after this event, we work on this together.
Thank you very much, Sheila. It's a pleasure to have you with us and to hear of all the great work that you've been doing. We'll move now to our final speaker, Ms. Gurley Lopez, who has turned her camera on. Ms. Lopez is with Build Change, and her work focuses on improving access to capital and overseeing the scaling of housing finance loans in partnership with many financial service providers. Gurley, over to you, please. And we're running a bit behind, so if I can ask you to keep your comments as brief as possible. Thanks.
Thank you. So good day to everyone. Today we'll share with you our experience in the Philippines providing access to affordable housing microfinance to build disaster resilient houses for low income family as an example for the innovative financing modality that we are now discussing for the informal market. So I'll quickly share with you our slides. Okay. Can you see it now?
Yes, we are able to see.
Okay.
Yes, you can see.
Yep. Okay. So in here, just quickly, Build Change has been working for the past 17 years as a nonprofit organization, delivering innovative, cost-effective, and scalable solutions to improve housing performance before the next earthquake or windstorm, typhoon, with our mission to prevent housing loss caused by these disasters. We at Build Change mobilize people, money, and technology to transform systems for regulations, financing, building, and improving around the world. Thus, some of our work are really located in the Asia and the Pacific, where the great number of the population are vulnerable to natural disasters. We started our project in the Philippines in 2013 with mostly post-disaster intervention after Typhoon Yolanda, focusing on building back more resilient, permanent housing and schools to protect against the next typhoon. Yet, after how many years, we also see the pressing need to build more and improve houses before the next disaster strikes. Thus, we commence our preventive programs. The program that we will be sharing with you right now is the Disaster Resilient Housing Microfinance Program. It aims to develop and implement an affordable, scalable, and sustainable financing product with technical services addressing the demand for resilient housing of the vulnerable low-income household in the Philippines. This program is anchored in Build Change's theory of change that to provide families with disaster-resilient housing, we need to address three major barriers, that is people, money, and technology. This program is in collaboration with Philippine financial institutions. Currently, we have 6, 4 of which have started their testing, while the 2 others will commence next year. It has 3 components: the awareness raising activity, the second is the development of the appropriate financial product for a disaster resilient house. The third is the development of required technical resources that can be utilized by the stakeholders involved. We're talking about homeowners, builders, and even the partner financial institution. The intervention that we are currently looking at focuses on house strengthening as well as new construction. The first barrier that we are looking at to address is that concerns people. Change always starts with people. Homeowners must want to make their homes safer. So Build Change works to increase the demand for resilient housing by raising awareness and helping these families take preventive measures before a disaster strike. We begin by involving homeowners so that the designs and the solutions to improve their homes are really acceptable to them. uh, at this program, we also develop some modular trainings and orientation materials, which we found to be useful for the homeowners and the builders as well. We have some hazard assessment. We are currently utilizing a geospatial mapping of the government, And then we also have some basic information about common natural hazards, disaster preparedness steps. And then we emphasize on the importance of a resilient house to mitigate the risk. We deliver this typically face to face, but during the pandemic, we also resorted to some online platform. The next one is about money. If people don't have enough money to build safer home, they won't. So an essential part of the work that we do in Build Change is really focused on widening people's access to affordable and appropriate financing to build and strengthen resilient homes. Specifically in this case, we collaborate with the Philippines microfinance institutions. These are MFIs who have been working for years. They have expertise in servicing the target low income communities. In this program, Build Change provides our partner MFIs the technical assistance and advisory services from end to end of the product development process, from market assessment to planning their scale up. The financing product that we aim to develop is one thing that is appropriate for the homeowner driven construction. It takes into account the hazards that the homeowners are vulnerable to, the homeowners' demand, their preference, and their capacity to repay. Under this program, the partner MFI may opt to offer loans for home strengthening or improvement or for new construction as well. More importantly, we provide the flexibility to the homeowner borrower to do the improvements either one time or as what most low income families do, improve or build their houses incrementally in multiple phases. Finally, we address the concern of technology. We want to ensure that the right building design and technology is available locally, is cost efficient, and affordable, and it uses existing culturally preferred technologies whichever is possible. Build Change recognizes the local technical capacity in each country that we work in. Thus, we prioritize the builders who are from the communities and we work to enhance their capacity. Under the microfinance program, we have developed these technical resources needed, such as we have an assessment tool for the homeowner builders to evaluate the current structural health of the client's houses. We have an automated engineering and design calculation system where the results of the assessment will be inputted and the required scope of work will be generated together with the project cost. We have modular trainings for the local builders on the house assessment as well as in the implementation of the prescribed scope of work. We also have a guidebook for the builders on how to implement the specific scope of works. And then we also have some different house designs to cater for the demand and the requirements of the clients. Lastly, because of the interdependence of people, money, and technology, we need to take a holistic and systemic approach, such as what we are currently employing in the Disaster Resilient Housing Microfinance Program. While we are currently pilot testing this in the Philippines, we also look forward to expanding the program in other countries in Asia and the Pacific. We wanted to collaborate with more financial institutions and other stakeholders who are open and one with us in saving lives and making disaster resilient houses available to all, especially to the most vulnerable communities and families. Thank you from Build Change for the opportunity to share our work this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Lopez. And thank you actually to all of our speakers, both country representatives, experts, and organizational representatives, sharing your experiences, your challenges, and your solutions as well. With that, let me turn back over to Sudhir for closing comments.
Sudhir?
Thank you, Kurt. Thanks for guiding us through this two very interesting and important sessions. I think the range and width of things that we heard were really very wide in the sense that we also had experts who've been working in this field from a more broader perspective at the policy level, at the larger picture of looking at what kind of solutions need to be there. And then I think it was a kind of a good end to the whole conversation where we had Ms. Lopez, who and Ms. Sheila, who talked about actually how this translates on the ground. So I think that was a kind of a nice wrapping up and ending to the discussions. I don't think I mean, given my limitations and not having worked in this field, I want to get into summarizing things. I think Donovan did that quite nicely in his intervention. But a few things, and one of the things which struck me very early on was from Alicia, is the fact, quite interesting and nothing connected with the larger issue, is the 25 to 30% cap on the rent as affordability. Principle which I have generally used in my own life in renting my own apartments. So thanks for confirming that that was not a bad indicator to use. But that I think was very useful. But more seriously speaking, I think in providing a kind of a framework, because one of the issues is how do we define affordability given there are different segments of society. And I think that kind of gives to all of us a very concrete set of an indicator. But the other thing which I think came out repeatedly to me in various interventions, whether it was Rajat, whether it was Mithul, whether Donovan talked about it, is the fact that I think when me and Shannon, Shannon is the one who has been leading in designing this whole thing. We were thinking of doing this. We were focused in a very limited way from our Bangladesh work. We were thinking purely about resilience to climate change and looking at how to kind of provide designs which are resilient enough to climate change. But what the main message comes out is the fact that you can't look at resilience in that kind of add-on way. You have to look at the resilience in a much more integrated perspective, which looks at the inclusivity of especially the most vulnerable and low-income communities. Look at it from their sustainability, and I think Donovan used the right word, and I think that is something which Sheila also highlighted, is the fact that rather than looking at providing solution to resilient housing, how do we make housing as a tool of providing resilience to those communities? I think that is an important perspective to bring in, because then otherwise what we were thinking was in a more peaceful manner, but piecemeal manner, not peaceful. But it brings in that integrated approach. I think that was very key. And the other, I think, important part that Sheila kind of presented with the fact which complemented others is the fact that most of the housing is actually financed, constructed and done in a very decentralized manner. The government has a very limited role. So unless and until, if we keep depending on the government is important, no doubt. I think that came out. They need to, as Donovan said, they need to set the policy regulatory framework. Sheila also mentioned that the municipality norms need to be made more accommodative rather than as a top-down measure in terms of a more interactive way. But a large part of that work is in a decentralized manner, and unless until the communities which are benefit and are going to use it are brought in, and I think that was a good example from Ms. Lopez of what is the kind of a way in which local material can be brought in, because that's an important part of the affordable solution that comes out. And more importantly, the capacity building at that level, so that these are the technicians, the constructors who are working at that level, they need to be brought in, and I think that was a useful tool to look at. We didn't have the time to go in details, but Ms. Lopez did provide that. That kind of a tool and packages is very important. So I think that was also something which the experts came up with in saying that this needs to be at a more bottom-up capacity building and a more decentralized integrating approach to addressing those solutions. So I think so. All in all, at least for me, a very educative session, increased my knowledge and understanding of things. on it. And also for us, we see that as a very useful piece of advice and inputs to as we move forward with our work in Bangladesh, to kind of try to kind of reframe the issue that we are addressing from adding resilience to the house constructor to actually making houses as a tool of resilience for poor communities. So thank you so much for actually coming together and accepting our invitation and coming and sharing your knowledge and experience with us and enriching us through that in this session. We will definitely share. I saw a lot of requests for sharing the recording. We'll definitely share that. Plus me and Channel will also try to work and see if we can cull out the key messages, key information out of this and put together a short brief which can be shared with all the participants so that we at least are able to document that knowledge. The second part, I think Sheila referred to that we would also like to see in terms of possibilities that how do we keep this, we have come together through this event, but how do we keep this partnership and how can we benefit from that partnership going forward in creating some useful outcomes through the project or otherwise looking at it. So thanks a lot for that. And I think I would also like this opportunity to thank starting with our donors, IKI, who made it possible for us to actually have this project and have this program today. And of course, all the speakers that were here today took their time out, and I think some of them late in the evening, early in the morning, participating in this event to make it possible. Them and especially Kurt at a very short notice, who very kindly and generously agreed to be our facilitator for the event, and to NDC Partnership and UNESCAP, UN Habitat and UNEP to actually reaching out to various partners in advertising this event and kind of bringing in participants to the event. So that was very helpful so that we could reach out to more and more people. And in the end, to Shannon, whom you all have been interacting with, I think the level of effort that she has put in has actually is reflected in the quality of the event that we had today. And also one important point, I think I would like to congratulate not only Kurt, but also all our speakers and experts. It was a long event and we only basically went up beyond the time by about 5 minutes. And maybe my contribution in that might have been much more than all your contribution in going beyond the time limit. So I think that was also something excellent in doing that. Thank you to everyone for participating, and me and Channel will get back to you, and we would like to kind of see how we actually take this knowledge forward with us and do something, build upon it. Thank you so much. Have a nice evening and take care. And also, since this is the close of the year, happy Christmas and a happy New Year. Hopefully, the next year would allow us to maybe meet in person, and we can actually have some event where we all can interact in person. Once again, it's been a long 2 years of going through digital interactions. So hopefully we'll have a better new year. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Sharon, any last minute announcement or anything that you would like to make? Sorry, I forgot.
I was going to announce the other events, but it's all right. I will follow up with them by emails. I just don't make publicities of other events. No worries. Thank you very much.
Have a nice evening, everyone.